Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Self-Knowledge course. Today, we will continue the topics from our previous two conferences with a very important and fascinating lecture. In those conferences, we studied the mountains of initiation, the three great works that must be accomplished in order to attain the intimate self-realization of the being. Today, we will study the final work. We will speak about the mountain where the principles of love within us fully unfold and become united, and where love merges completely with wisdom, allowing us to attain total liberation as immortal beings. Through this work, we become absolute men, divine sparks, capable of moving freely throughout the universe forever, because they become gods of the universe itself. This is the path that we have been presenting and explaining throughout this course, and which we have progressively developed in these conferences. In the work of the first mountain, the mountain of Genesis, or birth through the waters, we learned that we begin with only 3% of free consciousness, while 97% of the essence remains trapped and conditioned by the ego. We begin to work with the three factors for the revolution of consciousness, and we apply the trinity of fair, useful, and true as a filter in order to attain the quaternary. These become the four rights that allow us to preserve our energy: right thinking, right feeling, right action, and right speech. Through this process, our energy is conserved and purified, and as a consequence, the sacred fire awakens within the spine, making possible the regeneration and creation of the solar bodies. We cease being mere rational animals and become true human beings with a fivefold inner constitution. We become the powerful five-pointed star that symbolizes the authentic human being. If, at the moment when the path is presented before us, we choose the direct path, then the human soul, represented by the upward-pointing triangle, unites with the divine soul, represented by the downward-pointing triangle, giving rise to the perfect matrimony symbolized by the six-pointed star. From that union, the intimate Christ is born. We complete the first mountain with approximately 84% awakened consciousness. The triad composed of manas, the human soul, buddhi, the divine soul, and Atman, the intimate, which together constitute our spirit, will continue developing through the work of the second mountain. The work of the second mountain, which we studied last week, is the mountain of death and purification through fire, the mountain of the apocalypse. It begins with the Christmas of the heart. This is the birth within us of the intimate Christ, the fire of fire, the flame of flame, the revolutionary force that comes to carry out all the work of the second mountain, including the creation of the 7 bodies of gold and the opening of the 7 churches of wisdom. This work is represented by the 7-pointed star. Once the stage of creating the causal body of gold has been reached, the inner Christ begins to inwardly live the entire process of the way of the cross. He must be crucified. He must pay the hard karma for 8 years. He must eliminate the 7 causal selves, thereby eradicating the totality of the ego. And after descending for 3 days into hell, meaning the infradimensions of this planet, in order to complete the work of eliminating every aspect of the ego, he resurrects as an immortal being without the slightest trace of ego and possessing 99% awakened consciousness. The remaining 1% is the cosmic consciousness, which will be integrated during the work of the third mountain, which we will study today. The third mountain is the mystical death of 2 laws in order to merge into a single law. This work is dedicated to the sacrifice for humanity, because the master who reaches these heights must assume responsibility for the world teaching. In other words, he must ensure that the knowledge remains alive on the planet, and he must also find a disciple capable of continuing the work, so that he may finally enter the Absolute and remain there. For some masters, this task will be easier, because they already possess an advanced disciple prepared for the work. Others, however, will have to begin that labor from the beginning. This work may last centuries or even millions of years. The third mountain is carried out without the physical couple. Physical marriage lasts only until death separates the two. And what death is this? The death of the entire ego, which is accomplished at the completion of the second mountain. At the end of the second mountain, After the death of the causal ego, we remain transformed into serpent men. At that point, we must recover the remaining 1% of consciousness and begin the creation of the bodies of light. The fire serpent, which is the Christ, must unite with the Holy Spirit, thus becoming an Elohim. On this mountain, the Master has already become an androgynous being. This marks the beginning of the third mountain. The bodies of light are created during this mountain with the divine soul. These bodies must be formed so that the Father, who is pure light, may enter the individual. These are known as the initiations of light. At this stage, the initiate is already an initiate of light because the causal ego has died completely. The initiate has eliminated it 100% and becomes the beloved Son of the Father, a son of light. Whoever reaches this total Christification becomes a child of light and love, because he transforms into a universal and cosmic force, fully conscious at all times, yet without losing individuality. These are the children of light, those who become entirely Christified, who no longer possess the slightest stain within or without, not even the shadow of the ego. Only then can one return to the bosom of the Father, filled with absolute happiness and complete freedom, because it is authentic freedom. At this stage, immortality is attained, and the being may preserve all of his vehicles without being subject to laws or time. For this reason, Jesus preserves his physical body together with all the existential bodies of the being beyond time itself. His bodies are no longer subject to time and therefore remain eternally youthful, capable of taking whatever form he desires through the power of ubiquity. This is symbolized by the great sepulchre and the great cross crowned with precious living stones, which represent the complete culmination of the third mountain. The symbol of the sepulchre or coffin represents the death through which the initiate must pass before crucifying himself as a Christ and placing upon himself the great crown, symbolizing the crown of the King of Kings. The symbol of the grave represents the moment when the two forces die in order to be reborn as unity. At this point, there still remains a trinity, and as a trinity, one still cannot enter the absolute. Then, after the Christ merges with the Holy Spirit, two of the three aspects of love or Mother God have become one. The third aspect of the Mother, Lucifer, the psychological trainer, must also merge. The serpent must coil itself in order to form the O of the Spirit, or God the Mother. The Christ conquers the dragon, Lucifer, through every temptation and finally merges with him. Since the Christ has already eliminated the causal ego, Lucifer no longer has anyone left to tempt. Then only God the Mother remains, fully integrated love. However, the force of the Father, wisdom, the cosmic consciousness still remains separate. At that point, the being has become a perfect duality, but as a duality, entry into the absolute is still impossible. One must return as unity. Then, once the creation of the bodies of light is completed, the two laws are absorbed into one law, becoming united with the great law and directly connected to the absolute itself. This is represented in the Aztec symbol of the eagle swallowing the serpent. The eagle symbolizes God the Father, while the serpent biting its own tail symbolizes God the Mother. Both merge together in order to attain unity and total liberation. The Absolute cannot truly be described because from it depends all creation and everything that exists. It exists beyond law because it is the great law itself. Everything emerges from the Absolute and ultimately returns to it. The monads emerge from the Absolute unconscious, and through this work they must return with 100% consciousness, becoming part of the great consciousness and enjoying absolute happiness. To earn the right to remain within the Absolute, the initiate must have left behind a disciple already working upon the path, so that he may afford to disappear completely. As long as he has not left a disciple, an initiate who has chosen the direct path and is carrying out the revolution of consciousness through the three factors, he cannot remain permanently within the Absolute. Instead, he must continue entering and leaving it. And so this concludes today's conference. The Masters do not provide further details regarding these mysteries because the disciple must personally discover the triumphs, the payments, and everything that the conscious hierarchies grant in return for such great sacrifices. Here you can observe a synthesis of the three mountains. On the first mountain, we rise from the fallen state through the creation of the physical, vital, astral, mental, and causal solar bodies, thereby attaining a human soul. On the second mountain, the secondary triad, also known as the spirit, is developed. This triad is composed of manas, buddhi, and atman, or in other words, the causal, buddhic, and atmic bodies. These are likewise our human soul, our divine soul, and our Christic principle. On the third mountain, the integration of the primary triad takes place, namely the forces of the Holy Spirit, the Son, and the Father, allowing the being to become an absolute man. These 10 aspects shown here are the same Sephiroth of Kabbalah, the 10 self-conscious parts that constitute our being and that, through inner work, must become fully integrated. In the next conference, we will study a very interesting topic entitled 4 Classes of Hannesmusen. There we will come to understand what a Hannesmusen is, and we will discuss the necessity of ceasing to possess a double center of gravity and of defining ourselves firmly upon this path. Do not miss this important topic.